Hi and welcome to our online broadcast. Thank you for clicking on. You are really welcome. The summer has passed. The schools have restarted. Welcome to Brackla Tabernacle, Canelli Church, as we gather in this way. You're really welcome. Thank you. Over the last few weeks, over our summer period, we've spent time looking at Jesus in his own words as we've gone through the Gospel of John. The statements that Jesus used started with two words, I am. Echoing the words of Exodus 3 when God appeared to Moses, revealing a little bit more of himself to an individual than had known before. Jesus is declaring that he is God. He is this lawgiver, creator, defender, redeemer, deliverer. I am, says Jesus. One of my favourite lines is in John's Gospel when Jesus is having an argument with religious leaders and they reference Abraham. It's in John chapter 8, the same chapter with Jesus saying, I am the light of the world, and other great lines like, then you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free, and so if the Son sets you free, you are free indeed. They're great words. In the argument, the religious leaders reference Abraham. And we all do that at times. We defend our position by using other people. Children have gone to school this week, and so maybe in the playground when they're asked, well, who told you that? Well, my mother said it. Or if you're in university, as people go back this term, you need to reference professors and academics, and you quote them and you do all those things. In work, you might say, well, the boss said. If there's any minor argument in pretty much any family nowadays, well, Google says, or Alexa says, or Wikipedia, or whatever. The religious leaders in Jesus' day didn't have Google, of course, but they did have their founding father, Abraham. And so if you wanted to have the biggest hand in defending a point, referencing Abraham or quoting Moses would be a pretty decent thing to do. And so these leaders play the Abraham card. To which Jesus replies, but before Abraham was born, I am. Now, if you were teaching Jesus grammar, you might say, well, that doesn't make any sense. You wouldn't say, before Abraham was born, I am. You'd say, no, Jesus, you'd say, before Abraham was, maybe I was, or I existed. You'd have to change the sentence completely to, I existed before Abraham was born. And then if you were Jesus' English grammar teacher or Hebrew grammar teacher, whatever, after dealing with grammar, you'd have to deal with the content of the sentence itself. Clearly, what this 30-year-old rabbi is saying is that he seemed to be saying that he existed before another historical figure who lived and died some 4,000 years before that. And so clearly, whilst you fix the grammar, isn't the sentence a bit absurd? Unless, of course, Jesus, student, you are saying, in a beautifully bit of poetic way, that before Abraham lived some 4,000 years earlier, you actually existed or lived. Which means the religious leaders referencing Abraham as a debating point is blown out of the water, because if this sentence is true, you, Jesus, trump, not in a Donald way, you trump the argument. Before Abraham was, I am. And the religious leaders knew exactly what Jesus was saying. This was no grammatical error, no slip of the tongue. Jesus was really saying that he existed before Abraham. And the only way that could happen is if Jesus is God. I am, says Jesus. And they knew what he was saying, and they would not, could not, should not believe that. And so John's Gospel tells us that they picked up stones to stone him. You don't do that apathetically, lightly. You do that in a rage. You do that with zeal. And Jesus slipped away from them. Before Abraham was, I am. And so when Jesus says, I am, the bread of heaven, the light of the world, the gate, the good shepherd, the way, the truth, the life, the resurrection and the life, and as we heard last week, the vine. He means it. He really is those things. He really is God in flesh, come to love and live and save and die and rise from the dead, defeating sin, death, hell, and the devil. And for all who would believe, give life forever. What a Jesus. And that's where we've been over the summer. And if you have missed any of those, you can do what you're doing now. You can catch up on our YouTube channel. During this season ahead, there is a cry that we are going to raise as a church family here in Bridgend. This last week, in fact, this is the midpoint of a fortnight of praying and fasting together. This last week in our prayer room in our church building in Bridgend, which has been magnificent, we have been praying in different ways. Jesus, we want you here. This coming week, we're going to do something similar in gathered settings. God comes where he's wanted. And though he fills the universe, and if you're a believer, is present closer than you can imagine in your life, there is a reality that if you've been a Christian for more than 30 seconds, you will know that you can believe in him, be saved by him, but when you seek him, when you go after him, when you call on him, he's known evermore. He comes where he's wanted. And the cry of our heart in this church going forward is, Jesus, we want you here. And so commencing in October, along with our Alpha course, our parenting course, our Practice in the Way course, core groups and everything else, we want to talk about this desire for him, what it looks like without him, what it looks like with him, and create a hunger, a desire, a prayer language, a lived experience of being a place, a person, a family that wants him here. Because where Jesus is, everything changes. In Colossians 1, we read these words written by the Apostle Paul in verse 6. In the same way, the gospel is bearing fruit and growing throughout the whole world, just as it has been doing among you since the day you heard it and truly understood God's grace. I'd encourage you to maybe pause this video now and read the first, 14 verses of Colossians 1. Paul the Apostle is writing to this church in Colossae in modern-day Turkey from prison, and this short, beautiful letter expounds the majesty of this Jesus that I've just been talking about, and how faith in him transforms our living. And in these opening introductory remarks, the first 14 verses or so, Paul is reminding the believers in this city that the good news about Jesus isn't just a news report that you can hear on TV or read on social media. No, this good news comes with power, because the news is carried by God himself. He authenticates it, he carries it in a sense, he breathes on it. And when this good news attaches itself to an individual's faith, salvation comes. That's what happened to me. And if you're a believer in Jesus, it's what happened to you. Someone told you that God the Creator loves you. That you didn't truly know and experience that is evidence that you were separate from God. That separation was caused by your latent and willful sin. You've ignored him and didn't want him. And that sin has a consequence: death forever. But God loves you enough to rescue from the consequence of that sin. He did it by sending his son, Jesus, to live perfectly and die that consequential death in your place, in my place, as our substitute. And because death couldn't hold him like it could have held us, Jesus physically actually rose from the dead, declaring and proving that what he said was true, who he is real, and God's love for us is certain. And you and I can have this love. You can receive this salvation. We can know God now simply through faith. By believing in Jesus, turning from anything and everything else and putting our trust in him, you and I can know God's love that will compel you towards him and change you if you let him in the process. I wonder if you can remember when you believed that first. Those aren't just words that I've just spoken, those are the gospel. And God the Holy Spirit breathes on such a message, and you believe it. And that interaction by the Spirit breathed words and the tiniest faith in a human heart transforms everything. And in believing, we're changing. And the gospel bears fruit. Paul tells us in this passage that it's saving love and hope and faith and strength and power and endurance and patience and life and light and revelation and redemption and forgiveness and the Son. All of that, says Paul, is the fruit of the believing of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this gospel is bearing fruit all over the world, says Paul, just as it is doing in us here now. The gospel works. You and I can know God and enjoy him forever. People can still do that now. And that's why we are longing more and more people here in Bridgend to hear the gospel through our lips, because faith comes is kindled by hearing. And so if you're a follower of Jesus and live in Bridgend or wherever you live, you have that most powerful eternal message in your knowledge bank. You have the potential power to speak something that will change literally everything for another human being. And so we want to be a people that are encouraging each other to speak out that gospel, because we do not know who, when, how, if anyone who hears it will respond. That's why we're encouraging people to come along to Alpha this term. You can click on our calendar on our website to find out more. Simply because Alpha is a great course and environment for people to sit hearing, contemplating, discussing the gospel deliberately over a number of weeks. It's fantastic. So I'd encourage you to sign up if you haven't before, if you don't know Jesus. But you and I have got that gospel power now. And where Jesus is, the gospel is known and proclaimed, and in that he transforms lives. And so we say unashamedly, we want that. We want him here. A couple of weeks ago, I visited Malawi, one of Africa's smaller and one of its poorest countries. In fact, one of the poorest countries in the world. This is my third visit. I first went as a 17-year-old, not long after becoming a Christian, and went on short-term mission to Malawi and Mozambique. 22 years later, I returned a couple of years ago, representing the Apostolic Church UK, of which Brackla and Canelli are a part, to make the Apostolic Church in Malawi autonomous from the UK Church. For over 30 years, we had resident missionaries in the country. They helped plant and develop churches and see it grow and mature through the generations of its leaders. And our final missionaries and my travel partners on this trip were Alan and Sandra Skeen. And so we Mary three, returned to Malawi on this trip, on the invitation of the national leaders of our church family there, to preach at their national convention, and then to spend a few days with some of their senior leadership teams to teach, to train, and to encourage. It was a fantastic time. And maybe you are part of our church family and are catching this up, and you may have prayed either long or short prayers for me and for us, so thank you. Our base in Malawi was its second city, Blantyre, founded by David Livingstone, the great British explorer and missionary in the late 19th century. And on his trip, or one of his trips, to try and find the source of the River Nile, he travelled up then Nyasaland's great river, the Shiri River, and camped in what is now Blantyre, named after his Scottish hometown of birth, Blantyre. And the Apostolic Church's headquarters is in Blantyre, and from there we travelled south to a village, a town, a settlement called Ngabu. Over the last few years, Malawi and its near neighbours, Mozambique and Zimbabwe, has suffered from extreme weather and climate events which have affected millions of people. Flooding, and then often drought has wiped out the crops that these nations rely on, causing the prices of maize, grain, etc. to rise hugely. The economies have been severely affected. The currency in Malawi, at least, has somewhat been devalued. And so everything that was already expensive for ordinary people has doubled, tripled, quadrupled. For us, in an equivalent way, it would be something like if the price of petrol rose to around, £30-40 a litre instead of the £1.30 odd it currently is. Imagine if your regular tank of petrol cost you £1,000. How many times would you fill it up? Multiply that around the nation, in food prices, in jobs, everything. To survive is a challenge. And the Apostolic Church in Malawi is surviving. The convention was held in Ngabu, like I said, in the lower Shiri Valley, one of the most affected areas of drought and flooding. But that's where it was held, and so over 1,000 people travelled from all over the country, some travelling as far from the far north, which would take over 24 hours by bus, and not a National Express air-conditioned coach, I should hasten to add, but rather in a minibus where you're probably sitting on someone's lap next to a goat or something, travelled all the way. I therefore got to preach to legends. The theme we were asked to preach on was hope in adversity, and the seeming cheek of it didn't fail to hit me. What right do I have to talk about hope in adversity to people who were sitting on the floor in the scorching heat with empty stomachs, who had travelled for hours to be at a convention? I had no right. What do I know about adversity? But these people had gathered, and they gather regularly and serve and give and pray and do mission because of Jesus. Because the gospel bears fruit all over the world. The fruit of love and life and endurance and patience, as Paul says, and redemption and forgiveness. The gospel bears fruit, even in the harshest of conditions. And so I got to preach that hope isn't found to be true in just hopeful things, like the weather changing or life being easier. No, hope is found solely and truly in the person of Jesus. Jesus, the I Am, who will make all things good and right for our brothers and sisters in Malawi, maybe not by fixing the weather, changing the course of a flowing river, or causing barren soil to become nutritious. No, in this life, Jesus says, we will have trouble, but take courage, because I've overcome the world. The gospel is bearing fruit. And we've got to spend time with national leaders who told us that in the 2 years since autonomy, they've planted new churches, ordained new pastors and apostles, continued training projects and aid help, all with very little to do, very little money. One church was planted on an island in the middle of Lake Malawi with an apostle and evangelist travelling on a boat, sitting on top of an oil drum to go to the island and reach the people there. It is and was extraordinary. And things like that and things that I've seen then challenges my faith, and I trust in these little stories yours. How comfortable are we? How sometimes apathetic and fat and fragile and useless it seems some of our lives and our Christian walk can be. But undeniably, when Jesus is present, not only do we know his love and peace, but he compels us to love in such a way to get up, to straighten our backs, to strengthen our knees. Because whilst there's still breath in our lungs, we are on mission for him everywhere. You, me, wherever. We want you here, Lord Jesus. And so some of us have given finance in the latest request that we gave via our emails. I was able to tell the church leaders there of those totals, and because our church leaders here, as part of our mission budget, gave me a few £1,000s to use in Malawi for immediate situations, I was able to buy a couple of 100 Bibles for them with that money in the Chichewa language, which would be a great help in mission and discipleship. If you give finance here and the wise stewardship of our leaders, those things have been able to do those things, and so thank you. I've twice told churches, our church here, about other things that we've been involved in Malawi, which we don't publish on these type of things, and there may be more things that we do going forward. One really quick win that would benefit the church in Malawi enormously, if you're part of our church family regularly here, then this might help, is around technology and communication. And so if you've recently changed your mobile phone and have kept the old handset and is now sitting in a drawer somewhere, well, our friends in Malawi would benefit enormously from it. It would need to have a camera able to connect to the internet for WhatsApp, etc., and be able in a decent condition. So maybe instead of sitting in your drawer, we can send them to Malawi. The same with laptops and tablets. So if you've got an unused laptop or phone or tablet that you no longer want or sitting around, that would immensely help the administration and communication and training programs that our Malawian friends have. We had a couple of things in our house and in our church building. We must first restore everything to factory settings, wiping all personal data, etc. I'm not doing that for you. And then bring it in with the charger if you've got it, and we will arrange to send it by courier over the next few weeks. That would be a game changer for Malawi. And so if you're getting this, if you're watching this on Sunday the 8th of September, you've got 1 week to either bring it to me in the office or bring them with you by the next Sunday, the 15th of September. And what we've got, we will send. I trust that's all right. If you're not part of our church family and would like to be involved in some way, then you can either do that by contacting us via our website. You can give finance in those ways, of course, and we can sort something out there. The gospel, you see, is bearing fruit and is growing throughout the whole world. And I want to bear fruit in my life, in my family, in our church, in our community. We want to see it bear fruit because it transforms everything. And I hope and trust that you do too if you're a follower of him. Do you believe that Jesus at the center of a human life is the best thing for that person? Do you still believe that? Do you still believe that the gospel does and can work? And so, my friends, we have it. We have this gospel. We have it in our minds, in our mouths, in our lives. Let us be a people that see miracles take place here and throughout the world, the miracle of love and forgiveness and redemption and hope. And so this coming week, we have another week of praying and fasting. And so we encourage everyone to gather with us. You can find all the details on our website, on our calendar. Please pray with us. Please fast with us as we increase the volume of a cry in our heart, as we acknowledge that God comes where he's wanted. And so, from all of our hearts here, we want you